Are we really live? All right, I'm sorry about all the confusion. First day back from vacation, and am I rusty after only a week off? Good morning, welcome to Java with Jerry. I'm glad you're here. It's Wednesday morning, and every 10 o'clock at Wednesday, every 10 o'clock at Wednesday morning. It's frightening to think that people pay me to speak for a living. Every Wednesday morning at 10 o'clock, we're live with you, and I'm glad you're back. Yes, I was in the heartland. I'll talk about it a little bit more later, but I'm happy you're here. Orange Slice will have this episode as he has all the other episodes on Orange Slice, and so does YouTube, so you can catch them there. And if you're a podcast person who is listening to this, you get it at Podbean, and you can sign up at Orange Slice to do that too. So what are we doing today? A little commentary on national, state, and local news as always, and then my friend Luigi Rossetti, that you know as Lou Penrose, is going to come on the air. He is an erudite man of many talents, a former broadcaster, an award-winning broadcaster as a matter of fact, and now a government relations pro in his own firm, and we'll talk a little bit about his background in politics and in broadcasting. And then our feature today will be how to speak millennial, is how I teach you boomers to keep up with those staffers who are much smarter than you, that work around you, and your colleagues in the workplace who are millennials. All right. Let's start with the national news and the commentary on it. In news that cannot be construed in any way to be favorable to President Trump, as I'm flying back in from the Midwest, I learned that his former lawyer, Mr. Cohen, Michael Cohen, has pled to several counts of felonies on election law violations of paying off Stephanie Clifford, also known as Stormy Daniels, and Karen McDougal, both women who have alleged that they had affairs with President Trump. And apparently Cohen says he did this at the direction of the president. That's not a good thing, because what Cohen did was in fact make an illegal contribution of $130,000 on the Clifford payment and $150,000 on McDougal's without reporting it. And the president, of course, his team did not record it and report it. And so an issue for the president, to be sure, maybe not a legal issue, but certainly a political one. We'll talk about that in a little bit. On the same day that that's going on, I learned that Paul Manafort was convicted of 8 of 18 counts. 10 counts were resulted in a mistrial and were dismissed by the court, at least this time around. They may be refiled. The criminal counts relate to bank and tax fraud dating all the way back to 2005. So that was 11 years before the 2016 election, where Mr. Manafort served for a while as campaign manager for the Trump campaign. But they have implications for the president just the same, and the reason for that is more political than it is legal. The prosecutors often charge and sometimes convict people of either lesser charges than what they're really after with the target, or of completely unrelated charges, and then they use that for leverage so that they can get information on the target. They essentially say, I've convicted you now, but I will show you mercy if you will sing and help me get the target. And of course the target for Mr. Mueller and others is the president, always has been, and certainly for the left. And so even at its best, even if it has no legal implications for the president now, and it could have legal implications, some scholars say, for the president when he leaves office, it certainly has political implications, because the Democrats have been salivating to relitigate the 2016 election, which they think should have gone differently for a long time now, since the election ended. And they've been at it for 2 years, and now they've got something to hang their hat on if in fact Mueller can make something out of this Russian investigation by convicting others. So not a good turn for the president, and we'll have to stay tuned to what happens out of that. All right, state news. I've got stuff everywhere because, as I said, I was out of town for a week. So in state news, I saw something interesting that, this is not my state news. Here it is, that I thought I'd share with you, because we've talked so much about housing and how housing is critical in Orange County, and we have a housing jobs imbalance. And then I see this article that comes out of Jonathan Lasner's column in the Orange County Register. Jonathan always has good stuff about a noteworthy slowdown in Southern California's housing market, that now it takes 3 weeks more to sell a home this year than it did last year. According to Reports on Housing, which is an outfit that studies the patterns in real estate broker networks, including supply, which is of course active listings, demand, those in escrows in the last 30 days, and market time, the speed at which stuff sells, have found that there's a surprising slowdown in housing. Even though there are 4,165 more listings in Southern California than a year ago, which is an average increase of 13%. It's different in each of the reported counties. the supply for homeowners have put 8,600 more homes on the market, and there's a slowdown of 13% in buying. In the 4-county region covered in the Southern California News Group, it's a 15% decrease in contracts. In Los Angeles, there was a 13% increase in supply. In Orange County, a 17% increase in supply. And in Riverside, a 14% increase in supply. So you've got more supply. People have been jonesing to buy a house in Southern California, and you've got fewer under contract than an escrow. Why is that? Part of the question is, why is there more supply now as there hasn't been before? Well, maybe the taxes are finally getting to people. Maybe more boomers are retiring and deciding to give up the Southern California lifestyle and take their pensions and their retirement someplace where it's not heavily taxed. And maybe it's just a product of the fact that the market has finally reached a peak where it's so saturated at price that people are starting to put their houses on the market so they can pick up these prices thinking they're at the top of the market. But mortgage rates have also gone up, and millennials haven't been snapping up houses. So it's an interesting turn of events that Lasner talked about, and I wanted to raise that because we've talked so much about housing and about the pressure on building more housing. Does that mean we don't have to build as much? I don't know. All right, local news story. This is a big one for the town where I broadcast from. You know this comes to you from Stadium Towers in the Platinum Triangle in Anaheim. As I'm coming back into town, I learned that Disney has done two things. One, they put the hotel that they were going to build, the 4th hotel that was planned for Anaheim, on hold. And then I learned today in a news article by Alicia Robinson in the Register. I always give you the author and the paper so you can go find it and get more detail on this. Days after they put the planning of a luxury hotel on hold, the Disney officials in the Anaheim Resort District said they're willing to dissolve agreements that would have channeled millions of dollars in room taxes to the company to help them build the 4th hotel, and that barred the city from adding a gate tax to amusement for the park tickets, which for decades they have had. Disneyland Resort President Josh D'Amaro asked the city leaders in a Tuesday, August 21 letter to end the incentive agreements because they've become, quote, a flashpoint of controversy and dissension in our community. The net result of that is that maybe Disney is taking a really bold step to say, look, we don't want to be a source of dissension in the community, but that really bold step is also going to take away the development of an engine of generating income for Anaheim. And the Disney Resort has been a huge source of income. The hotel income that comes out of the resort, out of TOT, represents 40% of the city's budget. It's what paves the streets and greens the grass in the parks and pays for police and fire. And when you have the biggest employer in the county, and certainly the biggest one in your town, saying, you know what, keep your incentives, never mind, maybe I won't do the expansion. I don't know what Disney is going to really do in the long run. I'm sure they'll build out Star Wars, and they will certainly keep up the parks they got, but not having a lot of expansion of hotel space in your town and maybe opting for agreements. They're already talking to people like Garden Grove city mayor and city manager about building hotels there. It's not a good thing for Anaheim. So think twice, Anaheim, about these policies that you're putting into place, which chill the relationship between you and your major business. Is not a good thing. I wanted to bring that local news story because I thought it's one that has real implications for the stuff that we're talking about, and certainly in an election year has major implications. And so now we'll get to sports. I know I always tell you that there's no sports between the end of Super Bowl and August when preseason begins. Well, preseason began, and while I was back in Wisconsin visiting my wife's family and having a good time boating on the lakes and eating far too much bratwurst and drinking far too much beer, I got in there in time to see the Green Bay Packers play their preseason game against the Steelers, crush them 51-34. Always good to see the Pack do that. Go Pack, go. And of course, next week I'll talk a little bit more about college ball because it's coming in a week or so. So we're back into sports. We're back to where we can talk about something interesting, because baseball, I'm sorry guys, I know you love it, but it is the slowest sport to watch on earth, unless you're watching in person and eating peanuts and drinking beer. All right, it's time for me to bring my guest, Lou Penrose, onto the set, and while he comes, I will tell you a little bit about him. Luigi, come join me. You hear me call him Luigi because his real name is Luigi Rossetti.
Luigi Rossetti Jr.
But like everybody else in any kind of entertainment business, right, Lou has to have a stage name. So Lou Penrose became the stage name. So let's start there. I was going to read your bio, but let's start there when we get going. Lou is a principal consultant at Lou Penrose Government Relations, which is a full-service federal, state, and local government relations firm. It's a public affairs firm that provides political policy and strategic services to its clients in Southern California, but also in Sacramento and Washington, D.C., and you'll hear when I read you more about him and we talk why that's the case. He has more than 25 years of senior political, legislative, and public relations experience, plus he's got broadcast radio experience, which is where I want to start. He has been a senior staffer to 3 members of the United States House of Representatives, all 3 very different. He was a district chief of staff for U.S. Congressman John Campbell, one of my pals, the U.S. Congressman Ed Royce, also a pal, and currently serving Congresswoman Mary Bono, and we'll talk about each of those because they're very different people, and Lou served them all well. His job there was to communicate public policy clearly to the voters of California in those districts, and he saw while he was there the elimination of red tape guided real reform, resulting in re-election by significant numbers. He's very, very good as a seasoned and gifted political issue fundraiser. He does a lot of that. Lou is responsible for raising hundreds of thousands of dollars for candidates in federal, state, and local offices. He has a degree in political science from Binghamton University in New York, and Lou's been involved, as I said, in politics, campaigns, and broadcasting for 25 years. But here's the interesting thing for those of you that watch an amateur every week. Lou has an extensive radio broadcast experience, including hosting a #1 rated morning radio news program. As director of news and talk programming for his division, he led his team of radio broadcast journalists to 3 Golden Mike Awards from the Radio and Television News Association of Southern California, so he's a real award winner. He hosted on K-News Radio Lou Penrose's morning talk program. He currently does a program out of KOGO in San Diego that Carl DeMaio does. He often sits in for Carl, and he lives in San Clemente, so he doesn't have a long drive when he goes south with his wife Amber Hall and their 3 boys, Gianni, Nico, and Valentino. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, sir.
It's good to have you here. So let's talk about your broadcast experience and how you got into journalism and doing radio to begin with.
Very simply, I wanted to be on the radio. Wanted to be on the radio since I was very young. Always knew that I wanted to be on the radio. I was the kid that would, stay up past bedtime and on your clock radio listen to, overnight, talk shows out of New York City. And you have to be a geek to listen to that. Because they talk about very strange things, and you have to be really into radio to just sit there in the dark and listen to someone babble into a microphone. And I thought I was the only one.
Now you babble into a microphone.
Now I babble into a microphone, but there's a whole subculture of those of us, that are just broadcast, geeks, and we love it.
We were talking up here. I want you to share a little bit about this because I think it's interesting for people who haven't done radio just to sort of hear it and understand talk radio. Talk radio is really about a conversation. I mean, that's what the medium is supposed to be about. And I was telling a story about Larry Elder saying when he first went on, he couldn't get anybody to light up the board and talk to him. And so his engineer said, just say abortion or gun control and the board will light up. And of course it did. But you've had that experience live on the air. So talk about what it takes to really engage an audience and have them be interested in talking to you and have that conversation that talk radio is about.
Sure. And this is happening a lot in broadcasting now, is that you have a lot of people in broadcasting that are just talking to you. They call them commentators, but there's just a lot of commentary. Nothing wrong with that. That can be very entertaining. But talk radio is about you and me in your car, or you and me in your house. Primarily these days, you and me in your car.
Yeah.
And I'm talking to you in your car.
You do drive time when you do cocoa,
I do,
right?
drive time, but most radios listen to in morning or afternoon drive time, or overnights, and then it's you and me while you're lying, awake in bed.
Yeah.
But
geeks listen overnight, the rest of you listen in your car.
But for the most part, if you think about that, I'm talking to you and only you in your car as you're sitting in traffic trying to get home, trying to fill you in on what's going on, or talking to you about what's on your mind, then it changes the dynamic of the conversation.
Yeah, it does.
And it becomes much more comfortable. Radio, I think, is just the most comfortable medium of broadcasting out there.
It's a great way to have a conversation, but I think it takes a certain something, and you were talking about this when we were off air, when we were kibitzing. We were kibitzing so much off air that we were late getting on air, that you have to talk in a way in which you invite commentary and you're really having a conversation. That means being respectful of the caller, not beating them up, although we hear some jocks that are shock jocks just beat the heck out of their guests. But,
sure, yeah.
But
people taking their time to call you, you might as well have a conversation with them and find out what's on their mind.
So you spent a lot of years on the air, and you won a lot of awards for yourself and for the radio stations that you led. Talk about some of the stories that you enjoyed the most, or tell one that you can remember. If you're going to tell these stories, first of all, this is morning broadcast, right? Your wife Amber is going to see this, and your kids may look it up online someday. So tell the clean stories that you can tell about being on the air.
That's the worst part about this new medium now, is that it never goes away. You used to be able to say things on the radio, and then it was over.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did all kinds of things back when I was doing morning radio in Palm Springs, trying to have some fun with the audience and trying to, come up with new ideas. Among the stupidest things that I did on the air, there was a story, I think, in the paper that morning about some restaurant getting fined for, having bad restaurant conditions, and we started talking about people that work in the restaurant industry, and I invited callers to call me if you've ever worked in the restaurant business. Have you ever done anything to a customer's food?
Oh no, I can see this would not go well.
No, I didn't think that through because the board lit up. With folks that lived in Palm Springs, and they named names of restaurants that they worked in.
Oh, no.
And Palm Springs, California, like Anaheim or any other resort destinations, makes their living on people coming and staying and eating in the restaurants.
Right.
And I couldn't kill the segment fast enough, and I couldn't stop people from calling because they all wanted to share the story about how they did this to the cheeseburger of this rude gentleman and how they did this to the bacon of this nasty woman. And I just that was a bad idea. So you need to think through the topics before you go live with them.
Were you managing the station at the time that this was going on?
I was, so I couldn't even yell at myself.
So he couldn't even call in and say, "Get that jerk off the air and quit."
I couldn't call the hotline to tell the host, "Stop talking about this. We're losing advertisers by the minute."
Yeah. I'm killing my sales as I'm on the air. It's too funny.
But that was true.
I used to listen when I was younger to a couple guys, Hudson and Landry, and you probably knew them back in the day, but Bob Hudson and Ron Landry had a show, Hudson Landry, and they were on early morning, right? They were the people that came on right after the midnight show went off the air, like 3 or 4 in the morning, and they were on until about 7 o'clock when drive time, came on air. Yeah. And they did this feature all the time called Wake Up. So they would call somebody randomly, dial 7 numbers and say, "Hi, it's Hudson Landry waking you up," right? And they decided one morning to have fun with their audience because it was a popular thing to do. And they decided to call their producer, who was still in bed, who didn't get in the office till 9 o'clock. So they called the station manager and producer for their show and did a wake-up call. He, of course, didn't know he was on the air. They didn't have the 7-second delay button. He used the F-bomb on them. The next thing you know, that feature was gone. It never went on the air again.
No, that's not. We used to be able to call people live. You can't do that anymore. Actually, it was a radio legend, Don Imus, that caused that to end because he called a McDonald's and ordered 2,000 cheeseburgers, and, as the legend goes, and now that's illegal.
Broadcast people do all kinds of strange things. Did you interview people live on the air like this?
I did.
So who was your favorite interview of all the people you did, or one that shocked you the most?
United States Senator John McCain impressed me a lot because when you ask for particularly an elected official, you have a couple of layers of people that you have to get through to get to them to commit. Yeah. And then they want to know what's the senator going to talk about, what's the congresswoman going to talk about, what kind of questions, can I have the questions ahead of time, all kinds of things, which I'm happy to do because you want to get the star power and you want to get your questions answered. Right. United States Senator John McCain always, when you're screening him, during a commercial break and you're getting him on the phone and getting him lined up to go on the air, he'd always say, "Lou, ask me anything you want." And I remember it would be such a level of comfort that an elected official would be so comfortable in his own skin about what he was wanting to talk about that he never needed any prepping or never needed any comfort or assurance that I'm not going to go there with this question, I'm not going to ask you about that. He's like, "Ask me anything you want." I always had respect for him for that.
Speaking of people who are comfortable, and this will give us a good segue. See how this stuff works? Let's talk about the fact that you work for 3 very different congressmen, and each one of them has a different style, so to speak. Each one of them people I really respect. A couple of them I consider friends. So talk about the 3 congressmen that you've worked for and what your roles were with them and what you thought about them as leaders.
I think
2 of them are out of office, and now you can tell us anything you want because they're not running again.
They're not running again, but they probably will catch this. So
they may.
When they hear the
John, Ed, are you watching?
So I worked for United States Congresswoman Mary Bono, who at the time was the only woman Republican in California,
right.
and there's still only one woman Republican representing. That's Congresswoman Mimi Walters, but she was the only woman Republican, and and arguably the most center-right Republican in the state, just politically speaking. I then went to work for Congressman Ed Royce, who was probably the most libertarian Republican in the state.
No question.
And then went to work for United States Congressman John Campbell, who was, I would say, a very pro-business Republican, just a very business-oriented Republican. So, social issues, he had his thoughts, but they weren't what motivated him. He was very motivated by making America, work for working people and making conditions better for people to work and earn.
And he came from an accounting and business background. I mean, that's where he made his fortune, and he did make a fortune before he went to public office and started serving, and so he knew it, right? I mean,
right. That was his thing. So they each had very, very different points of view on what was primarily important each day in Congress. As I said, they both shared a right of center, point of view because they were all three Republicans, but very, very different styles. Each had their own levels of success. They all were at least subcommittee chairs. Congressman Ed Royce now full committee chair, one of the most powerful committees in Congress, the United States Foreign Affairs Committee.
And he's one of the most interesting people to talk to. I just saw him the other day at a fundraising thing, and no matter when you talk to him, he can tell you about some town in Albania and what's going on there. I mean, he knows the most intimate of details about international affairs that people never would.
You could not have a finer man serving the United States Congress for foreign affairs than Ed Royce, because he just knows so much and he's so familiar and spent the time.
It's going to be such a loss, really, for California and really for the nation to lose somebody who has that kind of depth of experience and the abilities that he has to reach out and touch people like that.
Absolutely true. But he's staying in the game. I'm not exactly sure what he's going to do, but he'll definitely be accessible.
Yeah, he will. He will. So talk about how, since they had different styles, your role was different. What did they have you doing that you go, geez, that's completely different than what I did for the last congressman?
Absolutely. I mean, your primary role as Deputy Chief of Staff is you're the number one helper. These folks can't do it alone. They need support staff. They need teams. They need folks to get them prepared. They need folks to look out for the hurdles that are being constantly thrown in front of them.
Plus, you're a goalie in hockey.
Right? You're a goalie taking pucks.
All the pucks keep coming at you because they got to try to get to the congressman.
That was something that I developed a real talent for, and I'm proud to say I did well. I was able to take the slings and arrows and keep my bosses, is how we referred to them, keep them out of harm's way and out of the hands of their political enemies so that they could do their job on behalf of their voters.
Yeah, I mean, the only way they can really get policy done is if they have someone who's helping them sort of fend the tough, stormy waters of politics. Yeah.
It's not an easy job. It's not an easy job from California.
Oh, yeah.
The flight alone is rough.
I mean, you're on the opposite end of the world, really, in a lot of ways.
Right.
Yeah, it's a different coast. It's got different attitudes. It takes you hours to get back and forth, and if you want to have any kind of family life, it's really tough unless you move your family east, right?
Exactly right.
And each of those people are very, very engaged in their communities. They were not the kind of people that went back to Washington to just sort of camp there. They would come back home and spend time in their district. So,
which is necessary. You win or lose elections back home in the district. So you have to come home. And as you said, the flight alone is challenging, but the scheduling is challenging. The time difference is challenging.
And now it's a challenging time to serve. I did the news story this morning about Manafort and about Cohen sort of pleading to felonies, which really sets up the political pitfalls for the president, right? Because if the Democrats win in 2018 and they get the House, he's sure to be impeached. They'll hang their hat on this, and then he's going to spend the rest of his first term, if he has any time left, to do anything at all.
I mean, I follow the stories as you do, and as you correctly pointed out in your monologue, there is nothing here that affects the president. Everything that Manafort was in trouble for all happened before. He just happened to be a campaign manager for a brief period of time for the campaign. And Cohen nothing happened that was illegal, and President Trump wasn't named in any of the indictments.
Yeah, but it's a political fallout. So let's talk about that, because you now represent clients. Tell a little bit about what you do and how sort of the background that you had, both in broadcast journalism for that matter, because you knew a lot about public affairs and public issues long before you started working for Congress people.
Sure.
And then your effort as a leader for each of those three congressmen sort of set you up for what you're doing today.
Yeah, I find myself in a very, very good position to help a significant amount of different kinds of people and entities and organizations because of my background of experience. It's a lot of fun to be in a position to help folks who, government affairs can be terrifying if you don't know what you're up against. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's some apartment complex owner that is facing, efforts at City Hall to rezone their property. It's going to change the complexion of the neighborhood. Or if it's someone that has international affairs business, if they're trying to develop factories in other places, but they need to bring American workforce down there, and they need visa agreements and all kinds of things that go on in Washington, D.C. that folks like me did all day, every day, working for members of Congress. And now you're back back home working with companies that don't do this all day, every day, and they don't know who to call.
Right, and and you help them sort of navigate those stormy waters of knowing which agencies and how to do shortcuts that they wouldn't otherwise do. They could lose a year trying to figure out what
Correct.
you know in a matter of a minute. And of course your relationships, right? I mean, you know a bunch of people on the Hill, so it's easy for you to pick up your Rolodex.
You pick up a phone, but it's more important to know that there is a way to solve this problem. There is an agency, a person, a desk that exists in Washington that can help you do that your taxes are paying for.
So without getting yourself in trouble with your clients, can you tell us some of the people that you're working with and what you're doing, or in broad strokes, what kinds of issues you're working on?
In broad strokes, I'm working a lot with folks in the rental housing industry because we have a lot of rental housing concerns here in Orange County and statewide.
And I forgot to mention that along the way, beyond all the other things he did, because it wasn't enough time, I would be just doing your resume. You spent a long time representing the housing industry.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah. I do love the housing industry in California, the rental housing industry in California particularly, because number one, everyone has to go home at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Number two, house payments and rent payments have to be made. So that's your primary concern about whatever you're doing for a living.
Yeah.
And we don't have enough places for people to go home to. And look, I don't have an MBA, but I had a lemonade stand. If you don't have enough places to go to, then the value of each one of those apartments is going to go up.
Yep.
So people aren't raising rents. Rents are rising because of the demand to live in these buildings.
Yeah. That's why I was shocked this morning with the story that I was covering about the fact that people are listing homes, and yet there's not a big snap up of those homes, and the home sales have slowed down. It takes 3 weeks longer to get your home sold.
I saw that.
Some of this stuff is just, it doesn't make sense to you. Talk a little bit more, if you would, about the kinds of things that you're interested in helping people with and where they can get more information. Julie is showing me the time. I can't believe we're running out of time already. Didn't we just start this? So talk a little bit about the kinds of clients that you're interested in, Lou, and who should be giving you a buzz and where they get information about Lou Penrose.
Thank you very much. Lou Penrose Government Relations. It's that simple. I name my company my name because people know what I've done and know what I can do for them, and that is help them with the challenges that they may or may not be having with respect to Washington, D.C., Sacramento, or your local city hall.
Yeah, it's all three levels of government because you got experience and all. I can't believe this time has flown by this quickly, and that I now got to wrap this show. This is ridiculous. I'm 3 minutes out. I mean, how did that happen? We're gonna have to have you back because I have more stuff I want to ask you about.
Love to do it.
All right, it's time for our feature, and you'll have to throw in on this if you have something interesting to say. You're a broadcast journalist, so you can just jump in whenever you want to. Today's feature is How to Speak Millennial When I Teach You Boomers What You Need to Know. And this one I find astonishing because it's not just millennials talking about this now. Now we've got educators who are talking about this particular phrase. It's a millennial phrase, not a word. It's throwing shade. Throwing shade is a sneaky way of putting someone down or criticizing them rather than attacking with full force, sort of head on whatever you've got to say about them. Those who throw shade prefer a more subtle and artful approach. E. Patrick Johnson, who teaches performance studies and African American studies at Northwestern University, and who has written about the tradition of insults in the gay and black communities, explains, if someone walks into a room with a hideous dress, but you don't want to say it's hideous, that's a hideous dress, you might say, oh, look at you. And that is a refined way of throwing shade, and has an element of plausible deniability in it so that the shade thrower can pretend that he or she didn't actually mean to be acting with incivility, making it all the more delicious, says the professor. So that's what's throwing shade. Ooh, look at you, when you really don't mean that at all. It's kind of like they say about Southern women, if they really want to say up yours or go to hell, or they really don't like you, they say, well, bless your heart.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
They didn't want to bless your heart at all. So, have you been throwing shade on anybody subtly on the radio?
There's a lot of sarcasm out of the Lou Penrose show. There's no question about that.
And you got to catch it. You got to look on Kogo when Carl DeMille is out of town campaigning against the gas tax or whatever. You can get Lou Penrose on the air and he'll throw shade your way. All right, remember to send us your dumb criminal stories. Even though we didn't do that segment, we do collect them. And if you do, and we use your segment on the air, you'll get your own Java with Jerry cup. Lou gets to take his home. That's a party gift. You take that to Kogo so that people will know that you were on this show as well. We're taking away from Carl maybe 200-300 listeners on any given day. Anyway, we're glad you were here. Next week we'll have another show. It'll be a lot more organized because I'll have been in town for a whole week. We'll have a guest that we'll talk to. We'll talk a little bit about the news, and we'll do another feature. And in between time, you make sure you go look at LouPenrose.com?
Lou Penrose Government Relations.
LouPenroseGovernmentRelations.com. Get in touch with him. Have a great week. Make good decisions, and we'll see you next Wednesday morning on Java with Jerry. Thanks for doing this, my friend.
Thank you.
Good. We'll clink and then shake. That's awesome.